So this is Human Design Catalyst Monday, April 15th, 2024. And today we're going to kind of continue our look from last week at other mystical systems that have interesting similarities to human design. So last week we looked at Master Path, and I've uploaded this. I know some of you weren't able to make it last week, so you can check it out. Master Path is a very interesting, obscure mystical system that basically was developed by one person who was essentially contacted by he had some sort of encounter experience, and he ended up in just north of Albuquerque in our neck of the woods with about 2,000 people interested in what he did. His name was Gary Olson, and the similarities to human design are that he talked a lot about the difference in light and sound, which sound an awful lot like color and tone, the way he describes them. And he also talked a lot about the fundamental sound, which he said was Hu, H-U, and that the Hu was essentially this way of getting in touch with the life force energy. He uses the term life force a lot, and just a lot of other human design terms. So that's definitely worthy of further exploration and definitely an interesting system just because of the parallels ending up in the same part of the world. Much smaller than human design. It never really caught on in the same way human design did. And yet, a lot of the same terms even. And a lot of interesting parallels. I mean, not least of which the who, this idea of the who. Well, today I want to actually continue on in exploring other mysticisms and take a look at the work of Barry Long, an Australian mystic who also came up with a system that has startling similarities to human design, not in the body graph, but in the cosmology. And I'm also happy to open up this to any discussion if anyone else knows of any other interesting parallels. But for now, I will at least be introducing the work of Barry Long. I only have one book of his, but it's his book on cosmology. And chapter 16 of that book is called The Myth of Draco. And in that chapter, the book is called The Origins of Man and the Universe, actually chapter 17 here. Um, it's basically it's this myth that really has a lot of commonalities with our own, human design mythos. The cosmic fairy tales that Ra was told in his encounter with the voice, and really how he was shown how reincarnation works with crystals of consciousness, how he was shown we're actually in a biverse and that there's actually this kind of binary, that early image Ra made where he showed the Maya, which has choice, and then he showed the actual mechanics behind the Maya where there's no choice, and how everything is in this biverse that's fundamentally about yin and yang. So I'm just going to start by reading a little bit from Barry Long, and then we can open up for discussion. And if anyone else has other systems that they've discovered, or anything that they have to comment about this, feel free. But for now, I just like to read a little bit. And this is from chapter 17 of The Origins of Man in the Universe. This is by Barry Long, born in Australia in 1926. He was actually a spiritual teacher for much of his life until his passing in 2003. All right. So Barry Long starts, the solar system is part of the myth of the northern constellation Draco, the dragon or serpent. In ancient mythology, the constellation is associated with death and salvation. The serpent is said to swallow up all souls that at death have not attained to gnosis, or real knowledge, and to return them through its tail back to the world where they once again start a new life of struggle towards the gnosis which finally saves them from recurrence. That is just about as far as the ancient accounts of Draco take us. The whole myth, if it has ever been told, has not been recorded in the detailed context and significance that Barry tells us he is going to reveal. He begins by saying we need to understand the character of myth, that it is impossible to describe spirit as spirit For spirit must communicate itself directly to the individual. So we can't really describe it in the technical terms we would like, but as myth, it can be done approximately. Indeed, Long tells us that myth is the only means at our disposal to describe the reality behind human existence. It is the language or the handwriting of the spirit conveying the significance of things perceived, the otherwise untellable truth behind the fragmented physical appearance of things. So, in reading what follows, it's necessary to look through the actual appearance of the part of the heavens he will be describing and actually relate it to the supporting structure of myth or truth behind it. This is what the ancients managed to do. They did not invent the myths. The myth or truth was already there, just as it is at this moment. It would be wrong to regard this draconic myth as imaginative fiction, as a creation from humans. This myth, which necessarily will be seen to touch upon myths of all ages and all places, is nearer to the whole truth than any statement that can be made from sense perceived experience. So, pretty bold opening, but something that I think Carl Jung would agree with when Jung discovered that the collective unconscious has is the same fundamental myths, the same structural myths all over the world, such that something that we might call Christian or Hindu is not really Christian nor Hindu. It's really there's certain mythological structures that appear across all peoples, East, West, and indigenous to modern. The solar system is part of the myth that Long calls the draconic transverse. As every myth must have its physical symbol or appearance in the world, the draconic transverse is represented by a gigantic sphere in space, thousands of cubic light years in volume, with the constellation Draco at its north pole. The physical extent of the draconic transverse is so enormous that its main stars, as seen from the Earth, are regarded as fixed. Yeah, and for those of us who've studied the fixed stars, we know that they're not really fixed, they just appear fixed because they're so far away. As far as the tiny Earth within it is concerned, the draconic transverse represents our field of reality, the world of myth. We can only observe and know the rest of the universe through it. So, I mean, and I would actually even say that in some sense, what he's calling the draconic transverse is really just the paradigm within which we live that is similar to the way Ra describes the Maya and how the Maya functions, how reincarnation operates. As we continue, we'll start to find more parallels here. Because so far, this just sounds kind of like the fundamental Hindu myth, the myth of reincarnation or something like that. Long continues that the draconic mystery or truth is so intimate to our earthly existence that it actually determines how we exist, evolve, perceive, live, and die only to exist again. And that we cannot go beyond this myth in any way except as our reality permits. And this is where he introduces the concepts of yang and yin, or yang and yin, as it's pronounced. So Draco is indeed a dragon or serpent. Its head is yang, its tail is yin. This profound cosmic principle, yang and yin, is the mythical bridge between outer and inner. Yang is behind the apparent external, created by our looking out consciously into the unconscious streaming down onto the surface of the earth. Yin is behind the unconscious within. Together, they represent the extent of the unconscious reality, which can only be sensed through myth, because myth alone transcends all conscious parameters. Yang, the serpent's head, is all eyes. This is kind of a classic thing that was kind of said about it, the all-seeing eye, things like that. A huge platform of celestial perception, as if all the stars in the sky were eyes looking down at us. From this vantage point in deepest space, scores of light years beyond our solar system, the Yang principle of Draco presides over time and events which on Earth are represented by life and death, the dynamic behind terrestrial evolution. From the Earth's viewpoint, Draco's tail, yin, ends deep in the unconscious of the human mind, beyond the psyche, within the mind of the Earth, the mind of the one Earth spirit. So between the head in space and the tail within is the serpent's body. And the serpent's body is the human, along with all other species, both living and dead. So already we just have this beautiful image of this huge platform of celestial perception circling us, kind of like the crystal consciousness of the personality principle. And then that's this head. And then the tail is deep within the one earth spirit. This would be like the design principle, the voice that Ra had his encounter with, which was the design crystal bundle itself in the Earth's mantle. So we already have this myth of these two principles, yang and yin, and that yang is really this celestial sphere, or kind of we can even say sphere of the crystal bundles, and that the yin is deep, deep within the Earth's core and is kind of unitary in the same way that Ra describes the design crystal bundle as one, the one Earth spirit in Long's terms, compared to the celestial principle, which is more vast. Yang is responsible for the Earth's evolution as an intrinsic part of the whole evolving universe. From its towering Draco position, it surveys the universe and keeps Yin informed. Yin is responsible for seeing that the correlating evolutionary changes occur within the terrestrial mind. So this is already very much similar to the paradigm laid out by Ra in his material on base, as well as his material on dream rave, where Ra describes that the personality bundles are kind of all conflicting with each other and all have their emissaries and have their sort of avatars and people on their teams kind of fighting against each other because we have these 16 prime personality crystal bundles that we call the Godheads. And these 16 bundles are all kind of contradicting each other, which really explains why we have so much conflict over religion in the world, because there are 16 fundamentally different religions, you could say. And yet, the yin principle, whether it's in Taoism or in human design or in any other mystical system that reaches the yin, is unitary. It's kind of impossible to have a conflict or a disagreement. There's only one yin, but there are many yangs, if you will. So it's already interesting when Ra describes the kind of paradigm of how evolution works. He does talk about the personality principle versus the design principle, or I guess the many personality attempts to kind of get their agendas done compared to the single solitary agenda of yin. And the single solitary agenda of yin seems to be the evolution of the form principle and the survival and maintenance of the form principle. So it's interesting here that Long says yin is responsible to make sure that the correlating evolutionary changes occur. So it's almost like yang is kind of watching everything. Yang is the awareness field, the light field, and then yin has to actually make those changes to match what's going on. And there's this complex interrelationship between them. For humanity, as distinct from other life forms, Yang surveys the universe relevant to sense perception, also seeing far beyond sense perceptive evolution to galactic factors that even our creator sun is unable to perceive. Yang conveys to yin the state of the galaxy as it affects the terrestrial mind in considerably more profound ways than we can ever be aware of. The character of yang and yin is will. Yang is Draco's head, the will of the universe. Yin, as the tail, is the will of the terrestrial mind. So it's kind of like these two fundamental principles, the personality principle, the design principle, the evolution of the form versus the awakening of consciousness and of the awareness, really. And we're seeing yang described in these terms in light and described in these terms of basically bringing awareness to things. And then we see yin as this principle that makes sure the evolution happens. However, yang and yin are not just a closed circuit Draco to Earth polarity, or, personality crystal sheath polarity with, I guess we could even say sun Earth polarity. Um, it's not just that. It's not just a closed circuit polarity. The yang yin Earth connection is only one of many comparable meridians linking numerous suns and their orbital matter to form a gigantic cosmic spiritual field. what he calls the draconic transverse. Within this vast evolutionary system, the outer must be kept in unison and harmony with the inner. Neither must get ahead nor behind. And yang and yin are the principles, the will in matter and mind, ensuring this. Yin in terrestrial mind contains all possibilities behind appearances, all that can ever exist in the present and future, all waiting for the moment, the exact time to manifest in consciousness, at Yin's behest, precisely to Yang's perfect timing. For Yang is master of timing and sensory appearance. Yin, deep in the terrestrial mind, is beyond time. It is the principle of abstract knowledge attuned to the original spiritual idea of the earth. Yang determines the time at which any aspect of that idea within Yin's knowledge is released to rise and eventually make its first appearance in the human psyche as differentiated idea, and finally, as the objects of the earth around us. So here we have a kind of a naturalist proto-philosophy, almost similar to an Alfred North Whitehead, or almost similar to the idea of Jean Gebser's ever-present origin, or there are a number of philosophers who have come around to similar ideas here, that there's sort of a vast a call of Akashic records beyond all time, and then there's a sort of a timekeeper that's that triggers the release of that knowledge into consciousness, where it first appears as an idea and then is later externalized and made manifest. This also follows Ra's sequence when he talks about the quarters and how we begin with the quarter of initiation, which begins with purpose fulfilled through mind, and that before anything can be built in the world, it first must arise into the consciousness of the builder. And only after this quarter can we then go to the quarter of civilization, and then on to the quarter of duality, and then finally mutation. So we're seeing a lot of parallels here, but let's continue. And if there's any comments as we go on, or anything people find curious or confusing, we can certainly disentangle it a bit. So Yang is the master of timing. Yin is beyond all time. And then now he begins a new section called real energy. And this is kind of an interesting one, because this is actually a question of what's the point of fulfilling your life purpose, whether it's through your incarnation cross, your unique geometry, living as yourself, all of these things. What does that actually do? And Barry Long has a pretty interesting answer here. Real energy. So Long continues, Yang is a principle, not a function. Although it is the positive principle behind the idea of action, it does not act. It's the principle of action. Right? Yin, the negative principle, is all knowledge of the earth idea, and in lacking the need to know anymore, it too is powerless to act. The action connecting Yang and Yin is provided by a cosmic power called real energy. Real energy is not energy as we think we know or understand it. This is because it operates outside our sense-perceptive time frame. Real energy is timeless, instantaneous, and manages to perform what is impossible in our physical time gradient. Action without reaction, action without consideration, action without pause, instantaneous flow, or being. Real energy is the power which keeps life on Earth moving and therefore evolving. Without it, life on Earth would be static, stationary, impossible. So this is a really interesting idea here. I just want to pause for a second and then I'll continue on. Basically, there's this idea now that there's this personality principle and this design principle, but it actually needs us to get anything done. That the yin principle itself, it's outside of time. It's like dark matter or dark energy or something. It's not a part of our atomic, four-dimensional space-time. It's something timeless. And similarly, yang is also the principle of action or the impetus for action, but it doesn't act itself. I mean, it would make sense if these are crystals of consciousness, that kind of act as a principle, but not as a function, in the sense that we are the thing that actually functions to make the actual work occur. So in some sense, we are doing the work to take the next step. The next step of evolution can't occur without humans incarnating and doing something to take that step. And that is, the human is kind of the intermediary between the personality and the design. And we're here to essentially produce what he calls real energy, which is not the energy as we know it. Because energy as we know it, you can't destroy something without that matter. I mean, all creation involves destruction and vice versa, and always kind of balances out to an equilibrium. So nothing is ever really created or destroyed. He's saying that real energy is actually accumulative. So in human design language, we might understand real energy as something that is added maybe even to the dark matter or dark energy stores, in some sense, that has saved our life experience in some place, not in our atomic reality. Or at least I actually learned the term recently. Baryonic is now the preferred term in quantum physics. Baryonic matter means matter that interacts physically in the atomic world that we know it. So I guess from our best understanding of how human design works, it seems that the crystals of consciousness are non-baryonic matter. It seems that they are not going to be detected in the physical reality as we know it, but are actually more like dark matter or dark energy. All right, so Very Long continues that real energy is the only thing so he basically says it's the only thing that keeps life on Earth moving and therefore evolving. And here's how it happens. Passing from yang to yin in the terrestrial mind, it picks up the knowledge of the Earth idea, then descending down to the other levels of sense perceptive experience. And I'm kind of skipping over a little bit he uses some of his own terminology of the different levels that he's worked with. The energy is the conveyor of the knowledge of the Earth idea to the senses and the catalyst of action at the sensory level. The result is the natural world we see around us, which is the combination of the timeless real energy and its power of action in expressing the Earth idea through the senses, therefore creating being. So really, he's almost describing what Ra looks at in base theory, which is how the Maya is constructed, that there's something behind the Maya. We have the three geometrical dimensions plus the dimension of time. So we have the four dimensions of Einsteinian relativity. But in human design, we also study five additional dimensions. And these five additional dimensions basically come together as pillars to create the result being the natural world we see around us, just as Very Long is saying here, that it's basically through what he's calling real energy, which is different than the energy we use when we burn fuel, for instance. Real energy acts without creating reaction, whereas in our physical world, all action produces reaction. Energy expended here in our physical world is equal to the resistance opposing it. So no real work is ever done. By using force as energy, man imagines he creates and destroys, while really he creates and destroys nothing. From the exploding of a hydrogen bomb to the tapping of a keyboard, the effects of our efforts are purely formal. They're purely cosmetic. Nothing permanent is accomplished. Apart from the continuation of the human race and the world as an historical whole. In our sense-perceptive world of cause and effect, life or knowledge loses its instantaneity and becomes historicity, or the past. Because real energy is timeless, there's no interval in it, but time as we know it consists of intervals. Even the movement of the second hand of the clock takes time, and so we end up living in the past. Now, he's moving pretty quickly with some pretty loose terminology here, so I wouldn't take it so seriously what he's saying, other than the kind of general gist that the Maya is ultimately at a delay from what's actually going on. That there's actually something happening that by the time the mind becomes aware of it, we're kind of already becoming aware of something that has already happened. Whereas when we're really living in the flow of life, the life force energy, we're kind of living in that experiential flow, and perhaps we are no longer at this weird delay because we're kind of no longer trapped in the mind, is maybe part of the idea here. What we call energy and use or see acting on Earth as heat, sunlight, electricity, and nuclear power is only reactivated secondhand energy. It works as force, and there's no being or life in this force. It's not a life force, it's just a force. This reactivated energy has had 99.9% of the original knowledge extracted from it. In fact, a definition of force is energy devoid of knowledge, for force can only convey information, but not true knowledge. So here he's being a little bit pedantic and a little bit, as mystics love to do. He's being a little bit Zen here. But I think the idea is that so often we try to do something and think that the action that we're taking is going to make a change, but that so much of this sound and fury and kind of actions and struggling and so on is really just creating resistance. I mean, he even uses the term resistance earlier. He says every action we take in this world, we have to expend a certain amount of energy equal to the resistance it meets. And so it is a very human design idea that mostly what people are doing is just going around, not really in touch with the real life force energy, trying to force everything, trying to force things to be one way or force things to be another by basically using energy, but that without having actual knowledge, that there's no intelligence behind it. It's kind of like how Ra talks about the tonal architecture actually allowing the intelligence to get out or to, and so most of the energy that is being exchanged doesn't really contain any, doesn't contain any real knowledge in it. Knowledge is distinguishable by the fact that it takes no time. So I think this would be like also very related to the idea of individual circuitry. You just know, like the knowing is just this instantaneous knowing. Information, on the other hand, always takes time to receive the information, to consider it, to explain it, to think about it, to speak it, to write it. So basically, there's a kind of a difference here between what we do to inform each other versus the immediate inner knowing, which I think in human design we associate with the individual experience. Which doesn't mean you have to have individual circuitry to experience it, but it could be during a transit or who knows what. I mean, but it's just kind of that immediate, instantaneous knowing. To have knowledge is also to know nothing with a great difference. Knowledge, being real energy, is timeless. The intervals required for consideration and transmission are absent. This means that the knowledge being received from Yang is already known by Yin within. The transmission is absolutely immediate. And because the profound knowledge of the cosmic power works for the good of the entire universe as well as the earth, the knowledge is always that all is good or all is right. So here we have an interesting idea too, that it's kind of like, I get the question often, how was Ra able to spend 20 years unfolding his encounter with the voice when it only lasted 8 days? Well, it seems that he was given an instantaneous knowledge, and that instantaneous knowledge, of course, once he had to get it out as information, took a long time for that knowledge to be expressed in the myriad ways that it could as information. I also like that the fundamental knowledge is that all is good or all is right, which reminds me a lot of innocence and just how innocence has this eternal optimism of saying that no matter how bad things are, that actually everything is good in some way because it's leading to the next thing. It's like the truth of the experiential, that if the point is to have the experience and you've had the experience, then no matter what happens, it's actually good because it's increased the experiential knowledge. In human consciousness, such knowledge eliminates normal anxieties, which can be aroused by information as bad news. The good news in information is only temporary because other information, probably contradicting the good news, is on the way. This is a world of conflicting information, conflicting good and bad news. This phenomenon is typically human and unknown in the rest of the universe, where no matter what happens, there is timeless knowledge that all is for the good of the whole. Now, of course, I think it's typically human because we're the only ones with self-reflected consciousness, so we're the ones living out the Maya experiment. And it's an interesting idea here, but that we're kind of in the experiment of good news, bad news. And so much of what human design is about is really adopting that attitude of surrender where the mind is the passenger observing what's happening instead of trying to control what's happening. So it's not reacting to the bad news or reacting to the good news. It's simply observing the news coming in. Cosmic participation. The objective of evolution can be said to rid the world of subjective considerations, which means ridding ourselves of self. That's a funny idea. Like, what is evolution actually trying to do? Interesting. When Long says that real energy and knowledge are objective, he means totally objective. That is to say, the subjective, what we regard as ourselves in time, is utterly eliminated from the perception. The result is being in the now. Evolution on this planet, being controlled by the real energy acting between yang and yin, is universally inspired and is not the isolated phenomenon we tend to think it is. Well, that's pretty obvious to us in human design, that our human evolution is not something particular to Earth or to our solar system. Actually, our solar system, as the sort of ajna center of the entire cosmos, is unique in the entire universe, or the biverse, as Ra liked to call it, pointing out its dualistic nature. So evolution on this planet is absolutely universally inspired. It's not some isolated thing just to our planetary system. Long continues, evolution is a cosmic movement towards cosmic consciousness, towards man's conscious participation in the universe. Well, if only he knew we're going to end up as the Aeron, which, that is some sort of conscious participation in the universe, maybe more literally than he even realized. To participate, we must have something real and of value to contribute. In evolutionary terms, our contribution to the whole can be gauged by the condition of our world in relation to the harmony, justice, and well-being of mankind. And so, he kind of is a little bit critical here, I think, by saying that we have a lot of injustice and so on. He seems to take it a little bit literally that there's other intelligence in the universe. I take it figuratively. I do take it literally in the sense that the entire cosmos is an intelligent entity, but I also take Ra seriously when he describes our solar system as the only experiment in self-reflected consciousness. So I don't think we're going to have, alien life forms contact us or anything like that. I think that any sort of encounter with aliens are really best understood as an encounter with crystals of consciousness, which themselves do not have the ability to produce any experience whatsoever. It actually requires a brain system and so on to sort of simulate the experience of the encounter. So I do think that Barry Long is kind of onto something, but may have been a little bit too literal when he's saying that humans and human evolution is striving to become cosmic and to play a role in the cosmos. Well, that's true. We know from rave cosmology that we are actually evolving towards the Aeron, where we eventually will play a crucial role in the intelligence of the universe. And so we are evolving and honing our own intelligence and so on because we do have a role to play in the cosmos. It is not the evolution of life on Earth that is the point, but the evolution of our planet as a cosmic organism, together with the other planets of our solar system, and all other cosmic bodies and stars within the draconic evolutionary system. This Earth life that goes on, yet seems to end perfunctorily and witlessly in death for the individual, is not your life or my life, but the life of the planet Earth itself evolving towards a greater consciousness. Both in living and life after death, we all combine like cells to form one single evolving terrestrial being within this universal reality. Through the Yang-Yin real energy connections to the draconic system, our sun, the earth, the planets, and other stars and cosmic bodies contained in it communicate with and inform each other, exchanging and integrating their continuously changing evolutionary tones or states. We have nothing to contribute to cosmic evolution except our death. Man, together with all the species, lives, dies, and recurs in the one-way incoming energy system of the Draconic transverse, where the energy system of the Draconic transverse is continuously being received into the three planes of human existence. That is to say, our individual body, along with its nature and character, and our emotional and mental responses. But no real energy whatsoever goes out from him into the cosmos until he dies. This energy, the value of his life just lived, becomes part of cosmic evolution by passing through the death band, where Yin, Draco's tail within the terrestrial mind, absorbs the information and then passes it into the full draconic system of Yin and Yang, unifying inner and outer existence. At our present level of development, only life and death produce real or cosmic spiritual energy. So this is very similar to the idea that at the time of death, the personality crystal may go on to a bundle or can kind of hang out and then get picked up by its prime bundle again. But the design crystal returns to the design crystal bundle in the Earth's mantle and essentially brings the information of the life lived back into the sort of collective unconscious or the one Earth spirit or one Earth mind. Yeah, so yeah, I like the joke there. Who knows, Rachel? In our last session, we looked at Master Path, where HU, the Who, is seen as the name of the universal life force energy. So that's fun. Casey's asking if maybe yeah, with Ra said that we're the only intelligence in the universe. Yeah, basically, the idea is that all other intelligence from other planetary systems and so on is not self-reflected. So the entire thing is intelligent in the way that your big toe is intelligent, but it's not like you stub your toe and your big toe goes, "Hey, give me a breakdown here." You know, it's not talking to you and thinking about it and all of these things, right? So it's not really a question of I would put it this way. I know people who've had alien encounters, and I also know people who've encountered gods, like actual god entities. I know someone who encountered Bigfoot once. I also know people who've seen ghosts. I would not diminish any of those experiences. Those are all at the same level of encounter. And if you can believe one, you can believe the other, but we should believe them in the same sort of way, which is to say, as an encounter with something that required the brain system of the person encountering to produce it. It's like our brain systems are these amazing holodecks that can create virtual reality. And when we encounter crystals of consciousness, they can appear thanks to this amazing holodeck of the brain system as perfectly real. And yet someone else might not see them. So that would be an example of, how I consider the reality of other intelligences. I mean, in some sense, they're absolutely real. In another sense, they're not atomic in the way we understand them. Yeah. Yes, you are a holodeck, Rachel. We're all holodecks. I guess some of us may have easier time accessing that than others, depending on various factors. Okay, so I hope you're all still with me with very long here. I know that this is kind of pretty dense text we've chosen for today, but we're more than halfway done. So right now, basically, we're at the part where very long is saying the whole point of living is to have a life experience so we die, and then basically at our present level of development, this life or death is the only way that we can produce real energy. And that this is how we actually continue evolution. It requires this life and death system. It would stop if people stopped dying. Like if we figured out a way to live 1,000 years, evolution would come to a screeching halt because cosmic evolution is currently working by basically this energy being continuously received in the three planes of human existence, the physical, the mental, and the emotional, correlating very well to the spleen, the ajna, and the solar plexus. And then from that point on, all the real energy that's coming into the person, basically that they're kind of absorbing, they're holding within them, and then at the point of death is given back to yin, to the design crystal bundle, which is then able to communicate that out into the world. The species as a whole, with humans in particular, are the chemical agency of the Earth for receiving and converting cosmic energy to the frequency of the terrestrial mind. Similar to what Buckminster Fuller said, which he said that human beings are the external metabolism of the Earth because we metabolize so many things. We take in one thing and put out another. We take in oil and put out CO, we put out, carbon monoxide, or we take in air and put out CO2, or all these different things, right? So we are an external metabolism of the earth. Terence McKenna put it a little bit differently. He said humans are the sex organs of technology, that technology reproduces by having humans basically breed it. We have to create new technologies. So it's kind of a cute version of this. But Long's version is that humans are the chemical agency of the earth for receiving and converting the cosmic energy, the only real energy, to the frequency of terrestrial mind, which is the design crystal bundle. So we're really the only way to actually add or create something new and to kind of push the bar of evolution. Man's life is ingestion, his living experience conversion, and his death distillation. So we ingest a whole bunch of things. As we live, we convert them all. And then at the point of death, there's a distillation that occurs. He converts this energy to his unique individual frequency by the pleasure and pain of his life experience. Interesting, right? So it's like all of our emotional pleasures and pains, all of our frustrations or satisfactions or surprises or disappointments and so on, that all of these are converting this energy to a particular unique frequency, which on death passes into the draconic system. All right, comment from Hanifa. Both of these perspectives make her think about how viruses use us for replication and make up a great deal of our DNA. Very technological. Absolutely. And I had a really interesting conversation in Frequencies a while back with Ben Zen, who's this guy who's done a lot of research on single-celled organisms and basically thinks that they are the physical substrate of the collective unconscious and so on. And then Rachel comments, weird to think of the 21 grams of the supposed soul, the weight that was recorded to be lost at the moment of death. Yeah, I always like that one. Kind of a cute thing. And quarter of mutation is very long quarter of mutation. He might be, I wonder if he might be like a Sagittarius or something, which I guess Libra, I guess it's still duality, but yeah, I'm not actually sure. It's been a while since I've looked into him. All right, Long continues with this section with the header, astrology. And we're pretty close to being done here. We're maybe 5 more minutes of reading, probably, maybe 10. And then we can open up the discussion. Yeah, we're pretty close. So he opens up this section on astrology as the real value. And he's also he was born in 1926. So I guess a man this, a man that, mankind this, mankind that. I mean, we could replace this with humankind, but if you'll forgive his somewhat dated description, as the real value of a man's life passes out of terrestrial mind via the yin-yang draconic connection. So I guess after death, he's saying, it disperses and manifests throughout the entire universe. Because the man has always been a part of the universe, his energy pervades even the most distant nebulae and is in every energetic expression originating anywhere in the universe. Every cosmic influence received on Earth has to have his number on it. For these cosmic influences to be received on Earth, they first have to be converted to our particular terrestrial frequency. And this is performed by the sun's radiation. Acting like a massive broom or an electromagnetic brush, ceaselessly sweeping the vast area prescribed by the orbiting planets, it picks up the influences from these planets, as well as from outer cosmic sources entering the solar system. These the sun monitors, downgrading and upgrading them to the suitable frequency for life on Earth. This information is then transmitted in photons and light particles, or I guess photons or light particles, because that's the same thing. A photon is a light particle, to the mind through the eyes and other tissues. Well, photons being the method of transport is a pretty conventional thought by a lot of astrologers, Day and Rudyard, different astrologers, kind of around the time when quantum physics was uncovered. And so I think now, of course, we understand this as neutrinos, not photons. But, neutrinos move at, for all intents and purposes, the speed of light. It's such a tiny fraction below the speed of light that 168,000 years, which is how long it took the light from Sanderleak to reach us. It also took 168,000 years for the neutrinos to reach us. There was no detectable difference, even of a nanosecond. It's such a tiny, insignificantly, I mean, literally for all intents and purposes, neutrinos move at the speed of light. Like I'd always heard that they move a little bit slower than the speed of light, but literally over 168,000 years, if you race a photon and you race a neutrino, they arrive at the exact same microsecond. So I mean, you need like to get to the level of millions or billions of years to actually notice a couple nanoseconds of discrepancy. So very long, of course, thought that it was the photons or light that was working, but I think that's an easy mistake to make because also at the time that he was developing these theories, not as much was known about neutrinos and so on. But yeah, as he says it, the sun monitors, downgrades, and upgrades the frequencies that it picks up from the other planets as well as outer cosmic sources, and then transmits this through photons to people on Earth. This process is the basis of astrology, which is humankind's most successful attempt thus far to formulate the mythic principle behind the draconic evolutionary system. Well, of course, Barry Long didn't know human design. I think human design would replace astrology as the most successful attempt thus far to formulate this process. So Very Long then goes into caution that it must be understood astrology is only an approximation of the truth because of the distortion of the human mind and insufficiently perceived data. The new life a man makes for himself in the death world passes as real energy through yin into yang to be added to man diffused throughout the universe, showering down onto the earth from the rest of the cosmos. This new life is absorbed by the mother to be through sunlight, as well as the food she eats and the air she breathes. These influences, released as time by Yang, are the external factor that at the right moment will trigger the man's conception and birth, just as eventually they will trigger his death. At the precise moment of his birth or conception, the entire universe, and more specifically the sun and planets, will be in certain positions relative to the Earth. Together, these configurations, correlating to the place, year, month, day, and time the man is born, will present the nature of his self-made future in the language of universal symbolism. If the positions of the cosmic bodies, yang, can be mapped and the symbols correctly interpreted, yin, for the moment of his birth, which is the earnest endeavor of all astrologers throughout the ages, the result will indicate not only his self-made nature or future, but also the cosmic assistance and resistance he will encounter in endeavoring to realize the full potential of this new life. Furthermore, the subsequent positions of the cosmic bodies will show the events affecting the man's life at any particular time. Man is a composite of three notions of time in which the cosmic forces act: the future, the past, and the present. A man's future is what he constructs after death out of his power to love. This is his real future, not his imagined or projected future or his bid to escape from death. Because it is real, it has no interval, no sequence, and therefore cannot be conceptualized or thought about. This future consists of two aspects. As yin, it is the abstract outline of his next life. And there's some details here I'm going to skip over because he's referring to different planes of existence using his own terminology. For people who really want to go deep in this, you can see his whole cosmology. But he's saying, in the yellow plane at level 3 is where this occurs and so on. I'm just going to kind of skip through that stuff. But as yin, it is the abstract outline of his next life. As yang, it is represented by the sun and other cosmic bodies that trigger the new life experience. This man's self-made future will be the broad outline that his life will follow, and as his inner yin, it will assert itself as his feeling of free will. I love this part. He's basically like, what you experience as your free will is your insistence on getting the kind of life that you planned before you were born. Like at the moment of death, If you're stuck in a world of hate and you can't find love at that moment of death, then you really have almost no power to produce a future life. But but a man's future is what he constructs after death out of his power to love. So if he's really able to like pour all this love into something, what is it poured into? It's poured into this sort of crystallized essence or inner yin, which becomes the essence of the next life that asserts itself as the feeling of free will. So every time I'm like, I don't want this to happen, it's because it's kind of, there's some inner crystal of like the way I saw my life going before I was even born. Something like that. It's kind of a funny idea, just a really cute idea that we experience our own feeling of free will, but actually it was like this thing that we built for ourselves in the future to kind of guide us through our life. Like the higher self has sort of implanted the feeling of free will in the lower self. But in fact, it can never be lived as he intended or designed it. So it's kind of great. It's like we have this, it asserts itself as the feeling of free will, this broad outline that life will follow, this inner yin compass, asserts itself as the feeling of free will, but in fact, it can never be lived as intended or designed. He will always yearn inwardly for something that never eventuates to his satisfaction, because the future he made for himself will be modified from its inception by external cosmic influences, which represent the evolutionary contribution of the rest of the immediate universe to his life. As he affected the universe, so it now affects him. So I like this. I mean, I like this idea. It's kind of like, yeah, we do have a plan, but we have to continually modify it because it's continually coexisting with every other plan, and it's constantly evolving and changing. A man's past also has two aspects, the yin and the yang. In its yin aspect, the past is in man's mind. This past is a chemical self that originates, essentially saying, in a more emotional place. He's using more terminology of his technical planes and so on, but it forms an emotional body around the abstract outline of the man's future. This body is the material man whose involuntary self-centered motivation is to survive and reproduce itself as an emotional and organic vehicle for perpetuating the species. It is this old man in the man which will often confuse him in his new life by seeming to work against his self made future. The yang aspect of man's past is represented by the external cosmic body, the moon. Acting on the fluids of the body, the moon's influence strengthens the man's emotional identification with the past, including fixed perceptions, memory impressions, and family, social, national, religious, and cultural tradition. So I like this. It's basically what he says is the future has a yin and a yang. The yin is basically the abstract outline of the next life. The yang is the sun and other cosmic bodies that trigger the new life experience. The past also has the yin and yang aspect. The yin is basically the ever accumulating mind. And then the yang is literally the interaction between the moon and the person. So it's like the moon is like 25% of who we are with regard to our past and future. If you look at it from that, I mean, in some sense. So it's kind of an interesting. And yeah, I see your comment there, Rachel. You have a plan, but so does everybody. Yeah, absolutely. So that the plan kind of is going to be complexified by its interaction with others. The interplay in man's consciousness between future and past creates his awareness of the present. This is where Beauty and the Beast, the agony and the ecstasy often seem to share the same moment in time within him. In the mind, the present is a swiftly oscillating point, and then he's kind of using his terminology between the red and the yellow planes. So you have to really go deep into his cosmology, and maybe if people are interested, we'll do a deeper dive where we go into the different planes and so on. But essentially, I think he means like the emotional and mental plane. So basically, we experience the present as this oscillation between emotions and mental, the emotional and the mental. I could be slightly wrong about that. I'm not exactly sure how he describes the planes, but it seems like when he's describing the red plane, he's talking about the emotional. When he describes the yellow plane, he talks about the mental. This point varies in everyone. The less evolved man living in the emotional material now, and the more evolved man living more in the moment. So I guess he sees the emotional material on one side and the kind of living in the actual moment of life in the other. However, in everyone's life, this awareness of the present acting sometimes as one aspect and sometimes the other, will very often seem to be working against both future and past. I also like how, similar to how Ra describes, for instance, different circuitry as having all this antagonism. The tribe is against the collective, and the individual is against the tribe and the collective, and the collective's, everyone's kind of against everyone. And I like it here. He's like, basically, like, your past has two components and your future has two components. And then your present is this interesting oscillation that occurs, and all of them are kind of contrary to each other. You know, there's not just one opposition, there's like 8 oppositions. Okay. Remember that in most people, for most of the time, the yellow plane is constantly being invaded by the red plane. Well, this is what some of his like more tricky terminology, but he's basically saying, and for most people, the intellect is colored by emotional interference. So while we're performing work on Earth, trying to be as objective as possible, dealing only in facts, then the power of our intellect may be relatively clear. But the moment we think about the past or act from emotional attachments, the yellow plane is invaded. And then once again, we become subjective and unreliable. So it seems like he's just really just saying, I mean, this guy is probably like maybe a little bit afraid of his emotions. This could also be a leftover from an earlier phase where instead of developing emotional intelligence, he seems to kind of describe these things in terms of being invaded by the emotion and so on. He really makes it quite negative. But I do see what he's saying. He's saying that even if you're relatively objective and you're relatively not in any sort of compromised state, past memories can trigger an emotional outpouring, which in human design language would then mean we just need to wait for the emotional clarity to emerge, which is kind of like returning once again to our equilibrium, I guess you could say. For humanity, every thought and consideration is in the past. Most of the time is spent thinking or talking about the past, and to a lesser degree, an imaginary future. Very little of the world is ever perceived as it is in the present moment. It is seen through the screen of past impressions, opinions, likes, dislikes, regurgitated feelings, and false sentiments. And here we're on the final paragraph here of chapter 17 from the Origins of Man and the Universe. The influence of the sun and the moon. For the most part, people live out of the past in the world of the senses. Invasion of the intellect by the self is felt in its most noticeable form, if felt at all, as changes of mood, or yin, which manifest as changes in behavior, yang. But more widely, behavioral changes represent cosmic and planetary influences transmitted by the sun, yang, acting on the emotional self, yin, via the brain and the glands. As the sun, symbolizing enlightenment, actually illuminates the moon, symbolizing resistance and attachment to the past, so it forces changes on the sentimental and emotional self. As the moon's influence holds the man back by making him resist change within himself, the sun's influence goads him on to dare and fulfill his potential. The moon making him seek the safety of the herd or comfort of the womb, while the sun tips him out into the world to live creatively, originally, and individually, in line with the life he scripted for himself. And gradually, through the traumas of living, man's lunar attachment to his emotional organism is broken and converted into solar love and cosmic consciousness. So, can we agree that this guy is pretty patriarchal? I think this is a pretty, I was going to say, as I'm reading this, I'm like thinking, this guy was definitely born in 1926. Not to say anything bad about that, because there were, of course, great um, champions of women going back into the 1800s and 1700s and before. But it does seem like a fairly typical kind of male oriented narrative that it's man's job to cut away his emotional attachment and so on. So that part of it, I think, may have a little more to do with the man himself writing it. But what I found interesting is just this very deeply detailed, very complex cosmological system that includes the idea that the sun is orchestrating with all the planets and other cosmic bodies, you know, all life on Earth, and that there's this whole reincarnative process, which basically has a design principle deep in the Earth and a personality principle out in the stars. And there's just a lot of parallels to human design cosmology here, and it's also rare that I find another cosmology that is so intricately developed, where he's talking about on the third plane, or on the third level of the red plane and the fourth level of the yellow plane, and all of these different levels and colors and so on. And it seems to be very developed, and not without its mistakes, but as he says in the beginning, he's trying to explain truth through myth, so he's kind of asking us to see through the words he's using and not get hung up too much on the details. So that's why when he's talking about photons, we can read neutrinos, or he's kind of talking about um, the yin principle in the earth. We can see that kind of as the design principle and the principle of evolution. So that's all I have for today. The whole book is quite interesting, but I think that's more than enough to. Oh, here's another interesting one. So there was a question put to him. Um, the person said to him that Draco seems to have such a great influence. Where do the other constellations fit in? And Very Long replied, the presence of every other constellation is seen through Draco. Any interpretation of any constellation will be influenced or distorted by our draconic life, so at best it will be speculative. So it seems like his idea really is just that we are in such a, like, our fundamental myth of our reality is the myth of life and death, and that everything is kind of seen through this. I mean, even the alchemists, right? They had the serpent eating its own tail, the Ouroboros. This is the same kind of myth. Really, it is the myth of the cycle of life and death. And it does seem at this point in evolution, as long as we have life and death, everything is kind of seen through that lens. Oh yeah, definitely hearing the patriarchy side, Liz. Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's kind of obvious that he's like frightened of the feminine principle, and I almost wonder if his fear of the feminine and his sort of solar hero myth thing, it was, you know, his attempt to maintain the superiority of the personality principle, basically. Right? His attempt to say, like, my mind is in control of my life, and because I know this, because it seems to me that not to always conflate the two, but that they do kind of go hand in hand, this idea of the autonomy of the mind and its power to control the life and so on. And so much of what we do in human design is really notice the ways that the mind can't actually control the life, and what it's actually good at is not making the decisions, but measuring things. um, was he writing in a second line time period? Maybe. I mean, this was probably, I think this was after, let's see, he was born in 1926. We got into the first line. I mean, he was born into a second line time period. I mean, so was Ra, right? But yeah, 1961 is when we went into the first line. So I mean, I just kind of see it that there are going to be different paths where what's necessary is going to be different for different people. I really like this idea from Jungian typology that basically that when you come into therapy or something like that, the first question is whether you have day world problems or you have night world problems. And I think this is from San Francisco guy, the mentor of John Beebe, Daryl something, I guess. Anyway, he was a Jungian in the 1960s in San Francisco, and what he came up with was this idea where he said that so many people come to him, and people kind of in the Jungian circles at that time were like trying to develop their techniques and their practices and saying, this is what you do when someone comes to you. And he said, you can't, there's no one size fits all. The first thing you do is actually you assess, can this person hold down a job? Can they maintain a relationship? Can they wake up and show up to work on time? Are they able to form coherent sentences? Do they have drug addictions or other addictions? Are they, like, basically, is there a day world problem? Can they adapt? Can they survive in the day world? If not, there's no way they're going to answer the bigger questions, the bigger mystical questions of life and purpose of life and all of these things. So you start with the day world. Now, if they're okay with the day world, then you go, okay, these are now people who have night world problems. They can't sleep at night. They're tossing and turning. They're asking, what does it all mean? They're tormented because they have unresolved issues where they've adapted very well. They're making lots of money, and they're likable, and they've survived maybe their parents, they have kids. I mean, all these things. They've done their job for the world, but now they have a bigger problem. And then you actually have people who have night world issues and they've resolved all of that. And then there's a third category, which is really the category that Jung himself was in, and many of the Jungians. They have they really are now, the question is, how do they now stay in the twilight? And the issue for the twilight is, how do you create a life that allows you to both engage with the day world and the night world, but you're not just like running away for week-long cathartic retreats, and you're also not just living some boring mundane life, and then yeah, and then there's people who have problems with both for sure. I'm sure, or twilight problems as well. But anyway, just kind of an interesting idea of kind of just like what's going to help you. Like I could imagine, Barry Long being really helpful for a certain phase in a young man's development, and then being really harmful in a different phase when that young man is kind of ready to give up some of his childish notions and start to develop his feminine side more. But I think what we've learned from Jung is that there's a time and a place for everything. And if someone tries to develop their feminine side before they've developed their masculine side, that can be just as problematic, or vice versa. So there's kind of, it's like I could see that Barry Long's sentiment was basically very kind of personality biased, solar hero myth, kind of masculine bias stuff. Not very useful for me, could be dangerous for some people, could also be helpful for some people because it could be just the thing to kind of give them hope. I know that, a lot of young men have a real problem with the mother complex, which is that they have a hard time getting out of bed. They're having all these day world problems, a hard time getting a job, and they're mopey and kind of going around like depressed and so on, and you just want to like pour a bucket of water on their head, because behind that depression and that self-victimization is this tremendous greed for life. They want all the women and all the money and all the fame and all the success and all of it, and you see this like really greedy, like innocent evil kind of undeveloped masculine principle among so many people. Well, what actually helps them develop is to sort of conquer their inner mother complex, and a big part of that is embracing the solar hero myth. Then they have to get rid of it, because if that's all they do, then they're going to turn into a Tony Robbins who goes around, or a even worse, a Jordan Peterson who goes around saying, "Clean your room. That's the answer," and and fighting against the feminine quote unquote chaos, and that's going to be its own problem. So the way I see it is kind of just be cautious. Some people need a solar hero myth, particularly young men, teenage boys, and stuff. It can actually be really helpful for them, but it's also a question of to what end, because that may give them the next step in their development, but then that might also be a dead end. Yeah, Jordan Peterson, internalized mother issues with the room cleaning mantra. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot we could say about him. Is he a 5-1 manifester? Is that what he is? But anyway, I'm sure he's helped somebody out there at some time, at some point. Someone had to hear that message. I don't think everyone has to hear it. So yeah, well, this was an interesting little foray. So definitely always open to hearing about any mystical systems with parallels to human design. So if anyone finds any others they'd like to discuss, I know Casey is our resident Urantia, or is it pronounced Urantia? That's a very interesting
Yes,
esoteric
it's your
system.
answer.
Yeah, you're our kind of Urantia expert, so maybe we can look at that sometime.
Oh my God, I would love that.
Yeah, I mean, and if
Such
you
a good
know
book.
of, and if you have particular excerpts that have parallels to human design, all the better. There's also the Law of
Yeah.
One material, which channels an entity named Ra, and there's some interesting parallels. And then I also recently picked up a couple of signed first editions of Dane Rudyar's books. I've been a big fan of Dane Rudyar for many years, and I believe he spent some time here in Santa Fe in the 1940s when he was part of the Transcendental Painting Group, and he was doing a lot of music and art based on mysticism, based on the Theosophical Society. And I was lucky enough to get to see a Transcendental Painting group show in Albuquerque last year. Now, actually, a few of the pieces from that show are at the new Vladim Contemporary. So,
I
Lasita,
did
if you've
go
had a
there.
chance.
I think I saw it. I
Yeah,
think
there's a
I
really
saw his
cool.
piece there.
Yeah, it's right. A piece from I think it's Emil Bistrom, and yeah, Bistrom did an incredible kind of Kabbalistic tree of life with chakras and so on, and so there's a lot of work there. And so Dane Rudyard was also a part of that group, and then he is essentially credited with being the founder of evolutionary astrology, really, or at least the founder of yeah. So great. And then as far as, yeah, that's a good idea as well, Casey. Yeah, we can go into that. I mean, I think that's a bigger can of worms, but we can certainly at some point dig into some of that. And I'm definitely over time that will unfold a bit. But yeah, Dane Rudyard really had some interesting perspectives on astrology and did a lot to. I mean, he didn't call it evolutionary astrology, but then later when Jeffrey Wolf Green and others developed evolutionary astrology, I know that Rudyard's work was kind of one of the main sources that they drew from, and that he also has a lot of work on karma, reincarnation, more of a spiritual, mystical approach to astrology. So maybe we can find some interesting parallels with human design there as well. And of course, it'd be fun just to look at the body graphs of some of these people. So maybe sometime we can look at Barry Long's body graph or some of these other mystics. All right, just also just a quick heads up. I did announce HDHD this year. Everyone who's a Signpost member gets a discount. So if you want to come, you can. There's an application for discount tickets, and you can just do that, and then I will approve it because all Signpost members get. Yeah, I'd love for you to come, Liz. So right now the address to check it out is tinyurl.com/HDHD2024. And if you just fill out the discount ticket form, then I will kind of add you to the list for discount tickets and we'll figure out what that discount is as the date approaches. We're kind of doing some of the logistics this week. So, but yeah, definitely want to make sure. And yeah, I'd love to see you all there. And I'd love for you to join Lisita if you are able to. This year, we have two venues, which we're really excited about. So we're kind of doubling the venues, which will also help things not get too packed. We have two official venues plus other locations like Ray's Country Garden. The two
Just
venues.
to tell you that Genoa does want to do something for
Well,
it.
that would be fantastic. And so we will talk more as the date approaches. We have quite a bit of time. It's September 18th is when it starts this year. 5 days. And then we have the Center for Progress and Justice, which was our location 2 years ago, as well as Oddfellows, which is our location last year. And they're very close to each other, just on Cerritos. And then we also have Ray's Country Garden and some nice outdoor locations as well that we can host events. So really looking forward to it. Already getting a lot of signups, so pretty excited. And yeah, I'm also open to suggestions for any activities, anything else that we do at HDHD this year. I mean, it's always kind of part of the fun of the challenge to think up something new each year. So the first year we had fire dancing. The second year, let's see, what was our big thing the second year? Last year we had a performance from Dave Myers. That was great. We had trips to 10,000 waves. The second year, I guess we had some fun field trips. We had a group outing, we had a barbecue, we had a really good dance party. So just trying to keep it fresh. Maybe we'll get some circus act or jugglers or something. I don't know what, but trying to keep people interested. So yeah. All right. Well, oh, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. So I did do a session discussing, yeah, preliminary discussion of Eleanor's system. I don't have any new findings yet to reveal, or if I get findings I'll definitely be sharing them. So and I also do have a plan to interview her on Frequencies podcast, where I'm going to kind of dig into some of these questions like, okay, well, this is the multidimensional angle. Let's talk about, what you found it could mean. How do we interpret this and so on? And what are some of the differences? And also I'm actually, to be honest, I mean, the whole multidimensional thing is an interesting avenue, but to me, I'm already so comfortable with the design that I have and that I've witnessed and observed and experienced through the aura, that these other potential body graphs to me are more interesting for like asking the question, why do I have certain people in my life that show up again and again and again and again. And so that kind of thing is an interesting question for me. Like, why is it that I've had three partners who are all born the same day on the same line and the same, you know what I mean? And I mean, I've just had a lot of, and then when I look at my multidimensional chart, I have that placement. And so I'm kind of like, oh, maybe I am kind of drawn to people with this placement because maybe there was some time when little baby Jonah experienced that, and it didn't imprint my aura, but it imprinted something, right? It imprinted something somewhere, maybe. That's kind of about as far as I've gone with it. But to be honest, I'm much more interested in her research on Kabbalah and Tarot because those are both systems that have a lot of interesting points. I mean, a lot of interesting archetypes. And I've known people who studied Kabbalah, and I would be interested to kind of see the correlation between, you know, Kabbalistic tree of life and channels in the body graph and stuff like that. That's more interesting. Ricky, to find the chart, so I can share the one she made for me. I'm actually going to make, it's kind of back burner because there's a lot of higher priority issues right now, but at some point I'm going to make a little generator on the Signpost web app that you can just generate your multidimensional chart, and it'll give you 8 body graphs. So the calculation, right now, the only way to do it is to contact her and she will do one for you for free, or to fill out her website. Or if you really want to do it yourself, you can do it, but it's not easy. The calculation is 88 degrees retrograde of the sun. That's the design date. 88 degrees retrograde of the moon. That's the rave. That's the dream rave. So that's your dream chart. Then you go 88 degrees 88 solar minutes retrograde. I'll find the link here. Then you do 88 lunar minutes retrograde, then 88 lunar minutes after birth, 88 solar minutes after birth, 88 degrees of the moon after birth, and then 88 degrees of the sun after birth. So you end up with basically 8 calculations, and they each correlate ostensibly to a different body or something like that, like your spiritual body versus your emotional body versus what we study in human design, which she calls the mental body. Kind of makes sense because there's a personality and a design. It's kind of like the unconscious, but I would just say of all of those different bodies, this is the only one that I can feel, you know, because I can feel the aura. I have 12. I can feel when a 22 comes along and I start to get nervous, or I have 34. I can feel when a 20 comes along and I start to want to do a bunch of stuff, you know. So it's kind of, to me, it's pretty clear that the actual design body graph that we're using in human design is one that can actually be experientially verified. That doesn't exclude the others as having some value, though. I just haven't quite narrowed down exactly what the value is. So the website here is Noble Energy Wellness now. She's made a few sites. Nobleenergywellness.com is the kind of current best way to find it. Yeah, and then what Casey is saying, the mental versus physical, emotional, lost her because it seems that it's all captured in the body graph. But the spiritual is interesting, well, because it's not, I guess. Well, I mean, it could be captured in the body graph at one level, but I have seen things be reused again and again and again. So it's kind of like, why wouldn't why wouldn't it be reused? I mean, and it would raise the question, what does it mean if, you know, your spleen is activated in your emotional body and your solar plexus is activated in your physical and so on? And yeah, I guess Rachel's comment, it seems like you have the natal chart and then progressions. Right. I mean, the natal chart is primary, absolutely. But I do see the interesting point that if you take the 88 degrees before birth and the 88 degrees after birth, you get basically 6 months. And that 6 month span, not exactly, you're actually a few degrees, you're like 4 degrees short, but you basically get, you know, you get all 64 hexagrams guaranteed. There are some interesting things about it. I would just say that at my current level of research, it's not something that I'm like pushing, like I'm not feverishly working through the night to try to like figure this stuff out, but something that I'm tracking, something that's kind of in the back burner. Oh, and thank you so much, Casey. Really glad you were able to tune in during that. And yeah, and you know, it's not something, I'm not like feverishly trying to solve the mystery of what these multidimensional charts mean. At the same time, it is something that I'm interested in tracking only because at a personal level, completely undefined solar plexus. I have nothing in the solar plexus. I have only gate 12 pointing at it of all the 7 potential gates pointing at the solar plexus. So I know that I personally have this incredibly sensitive solar plexus that for some reason I have had so many partners who were born March 17th and they were 5-1s cross of the plane on gate 36 line 5. I also have had a partner with gate 36 line 4. Then I've had partners and close family friends who are 12-2 and 12-3, which is my nodes are 12-3, which actually so that's another interesting aspect of it, because those 12-3s are going to be 3-5s where their 5th line is gate 36 line 5. And those 2-4s on the 12-2, their 4th line is gate 36 line 4. So having had like a grand total, if I were to add up the number of, and I mean long-term serious relationships combined with family friends, my first boss, like if I were just to take like some of the most important people in my life, why are they all like 36-4 or 36-5, either personality or design sun? And then I looked at my multidimensional chart and I have 36-35 in it. So even though I don't have that activated, little baby Jonah got to live through 36-35 and kind of as a newborn got to experience this 36-35 transit. So it's not completely out of my possibility that I would somehow have some special connection to 36-35 more than like, I don't know, 1949 or 4130 or any of the other emotional channels, 39-55, because it just is an oddity that I've continued to have these highly significant, very important people in my life again and again that all have a very familiar energy to me, that are all in this very narrow band that also happens to have been a transit that I experienced as a little baby at one of these potentially key junctures.
Yeah,
Exactly. That's my only point, Rachel. Yeah, exactly.
yeah. So baby transits, I can see the significance of that. But when you were doing the overview of Eleanor's work, it was just like, I can't take in more.
Yeah.
So much to understand what we've been given already by Ra.
Well, right, right. And if anything, the way I would understand this would be that the one thing that I really appreciated is that it helped me to imagine that 36 to me is not the same as 36 to you, regardless of if our charts look the same there, and neither of us have it. And yet somehow my personal relationship to that gate is almost was like saying like when people always ask, I've gotten this a lot, well, what role does your family of origin play? And what role does the conditioning of your upbringing? And I say a huge role. If your parent or your brother or sister has a channel, that's going to be so fundamental. I mean, how many people end up marrying somebody that has the channel that their parent had or something like that? It's very common. So to me, it was kind of like that. I'm like, yeah, it's actually very important. It's kind of how we're conditioned. And there's some deep part of us that's so familiar with that and so comfortable with that. So maybe these are just, I mean, there's a couple possibilities. One is that these are not important key dates, and that actually any transit you have in the first few months of life is going to be important. So that's one possibility there, that, when you're a little baby and you experience a transit, it still is just a powerful thing. Or maybe Dr. Haspel-Portner is onto something, and these are key dates, but what they're basically doing is imprinting something other than your aura. So your aura has already been imprinted, but there's another aspect of the self that Ra maybe was even aware of and just decided it wasn't worth it to even, like, why bother? Like, he could have basically looked at it and gone, okay, very good. Well, what's going to really change the world? People living according to the mechanics of their aura type, that will change the world, because then people can get along with each other better and not meet resistance, and they can relax a lot more, and generators will stop making a mess of everything by constantly trying to force everything to happen, and they'll just be more chilled out. And so it could have been that Raj just made the executive decision, hey, this stuff could be valid, but it's just not important. It's just not relevant, and it's not his project. He was trying to get people to live their design. The worst thing you can do trying to get people to live their design is give them even more information than they already have. That's not going to help them get to that point. So I could see it either way. I mean, to me, the jury is out of whether these are significant dates. Yeah, she is a 3-5 manifester. She's definitely anarchistic. and heretical. And you know, I do see that I have some karmic connection, because when I looked at Eleanor Haspel Portner's chart, I noticed that she actually, her personality, Sun, Earth, are my personality nodes. Oh yeah, and then Richard has 36, 35. Yeah, I've had a lot of I've had a lot of people at 36, 35 in my life. I mean, my boss of 9 years, and on and on. I mean, there's certain places in the body graph that are just so familiar to me, and I'm just like, why is this familiar to me and not that? Now there could be another explanation as well. It could be something nodal, just the fact that my nodes are also on, you know, I have some interesting nodal connections. My personality nodes are conjunct Dr. Haspel Portner's personality, Sun, Earth, as well. So another aspect of it. But yeah, 3-5 manifester. Leave it to a 3-5 manifester to stir things up. All right, good to see you, Lisita. Wonderful seeing you. Thanks, Liz, Shango, Rachel, Hanifa, Ricky. Till next time, and take care. Have a great week.